So, hi everyone. It's really a pleasure to see you. Because, you know, the way we measure our contemporary life, if everyone is alive, if our relatives are okay, and if Ukrainian military fights against Russia and Ukraine stands, so we are okay. I'm really delighted today to host an amazing person, staunch and unapologetic supporter of Ukraine, real general, who knows how to prosecute the war, and he is a student of Ukraine. General Petraeus would deliver his remarks. And you know, right now, we are witnessing a new type of Russian peace initiative. Russia has launched a new peace initiative a few hours ago. 400 drones at least. We can hear them because they are buzzing. We can watch them because they are flying at a very low altitude. And we can feel them because it's a huge trauma and drama. Designated war criminal Putin is killing Ukrainians, innocent Ukrainians. And this is a clear-cut response on all these different types of peace negotiations that have been occurring during the last, 13 months, if I'm not mistaken. Let's stop peddling all these fantasies that Putin is eager for any kind of peace. He is bloodthirsty. He wants to kill Ukraine, to take over an entire Ukraine as a country. He wants to dismantle NATO, and he is not the only one. He wants actually to undermine the Western world. And we as Ukrainians are at the forefront of this righteous fight, civilization fight. There are different types of deliberations. For example, let's establish a new type of NATO, or let's form a new type of unions. I strongly oppose these kind of ideas. We still have a very strong fundamentals. How to win this war. And it's all about Ukraine, the European Union, NATO, and the United States to realize, mainly for our Western allies, that there is no other path rather than to press like hell on Putin, not on Ukraine, not to exert the pressure on the victim, but to turn the screw on Putin, to turn the screw on those who support Putin, mainly pariahs like Iran, North Korea, under the umbrella of China, to show very strong unity and to deliver what has been promised. There have been a number of reports that, for example, under the Pearl program, Ukraine could be in scarcity over the ammunition that have been already contracted for Ukraine. Look, my beloved American friends, you are not in the position to turn the back on Ukraine because it's our joint fight. And if we win, it's going to be a joint victory. If we fail, this would be a disaster for everyone. And this is the very reason why I am so excited to give the floor to General Petraeus. Because this is the person who knows what this real life is about. He knows how to help Ukraine. He's very vocal. You couldn't even imagine how strong he is with his messages, with his media appearances, and with his behind the curtain talks all over the world, in DC and everywhere. So, General, I hope and I know that there is no other plan, we have only plan A, to prevail and to win. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon to you all. Thank you for the very kind introduction, Prime Minister. Thanks to everyone for being here and for the warm welcome. It is wonderful to be back in Kyiv, especially with spring arriving, and especially having been here in early February when the cold was bone-chilling and penetrating. And I want to start, of course, by thanking former Prime Minister Yatsenyuk, his incomparable staff led by Romina Shut and the entire team at the Kyiv Security Forum and the Open Ukraine Foundation for organizing this event. Thank you also, Prime Minister, for decades of leadership here in your country, for your very strong voice, as we just heard again, for your country, for its freedom, for its independence, for its democracy. There is indeed only Plan A. I come before you this afternoon, though, to profess profound admiration for the Ukrainian armed forces, for those who enable them, and for a nation that has demonstrated day after day what extraordinary courage, indomitable will, and true resilience look like when tested to their absolute limits. The Ukrainian military has not simply defended its country, it has redefined modern warfare. And in so doing, it has reshaped how militaries around the world think about the very future of conflict. In fact, Ukraine's expertise, experience, and materiel are now eagerly sought by European countries threatened by Russian incursions and by Gulf states defending their countries against Iranian missiles and drones. Across air, land, and sea, Ukraine has developed and employed unmanned systems of extraordinary sophistication and has done so under the most difficult conditions imaginable. Your engineers, your programmers, innovators have built the most effective ecosystem of unmanned systems in the world today. And they're not just in the air, they're also on the ground and at sea. Beyond that, they are networked, resilient, and constantly evolving and improving. Equally remarkable are the battle management and situational awareness software platforms that tie these systems together. The ability to detect Russian actions, rapidly fuse data from multiple sensors, and respond with speed and precision, and we saw some of that in recent days, often within mere minutes, represents a level of integration and agility that many militaries aspire to, but very, very few, if any, beyond Ukraine have ever achieved. This is innovation forged under fire, and it has changed the character of the fight in which you are engaged and the very nature of modern warfare. Many of Ukraine's new impressive companies, born of wartime necessity, are now producing capabilities that will shape the future of defense. Systems integration, network communications, battle management, and security concepts and structures well beyond this war. Many will go public, some will scale globally, and a number will become enduring international industrial champions. That success will be well deserved, but I would contend that it also carries responsibility, because as innovation accelerates, as capital flows increase and initial public offerings are prepared, it is essential that Ukraine's innovative business leaders never forget who made all of this possible. Wars are still not won by technology alone. As important as technology has become, wars are won by people. And here, if I may speak personally for a moment, I had the privilege of 5 combat commands as a general officer. Ultimately, as a 4-star general, I commanded the surge in Iraq, U.S. Central Command, and the surge in Afghanistan. I have seen up close what soldiers endure in frontline fighting. the exhaustion, the fear, the cold, the heat, the waiting, the sudden violence, and the long stretches of grinding hardship in between. Since February 2022, I have made 10 trips to Ukraine. I have seen your forces in the field, observed the work of your engineers, visited your manufacturing facilities, spoken with your leaders, and listened to your soldiers and the families of the fallen. In the fall of 2022, I was sanctioned by Vladimir Putin for my support of Ukraine, something that I consider a badge of honor, in which I immediately added to my CV. But when I speak about what your soldiers are experiencing, therefore, I do not do so from theory, but from lived experience. And today on Ukraine's front lines, your soldiers are enduring conditions as difficult as any that I have seen in modern conflict. Despite the advent of unmanned systems of all types, your soldiers on the front are still engaged in brutal close combat, often at terrifying proximity. They are holding positions in mud, cold, rain, and snow, sometimes in nothing more than very large, sometimes very elaborate holes in the ground with substantial overhead cover or in the basements of abandoned buildings. They are being hammered by artillery, glide bombs, and machine gun fire, constantly watched by enemy drones, hunted relentlessly, pressed without pause. They fight knowing they are observed. They fight knowing that they are targeted. And still Ukraine's soldiers endure, sacrifice, and press on with sheer stubborn determination and unmatched skill, despite being outnumbered and outgunned and in the toughest imaginable conditions. For over 4 years, Ukrainian frontline soldiers have contested every meter of sacred Ukrainian ground. And in so doing, they and those supporting them have inflicted staggering losses on the invading force. Russia has now suffered well over 1.3 million of its soldiers killed and wounded in this war, more casualties than those sustained by American forces in all of World War II. Those losses did not happen by accident. They are the product of Ukrainian skill, discipline, determination, technology, and relentless resistance. They reflect exceptional and adaptive leadership, effective integration of new capabilities, and above all, soldiers who refuse to yield. This is indomitable will. It is sheer Ukrainian stubbornness. It's the refusal to surrender land, identity, and future. And it is these soldiers, those on the front lines in particular, who have shed blood so that tens of millions of Ukrainians could continue to live as normally as possible, even as Russia has sought to terrorize civilians, destroy Ukrainian infrastructure, and turn off the lights and the heat during one of the most brutal winters in many years. These soldiers have held the line so that others could go to school, go to work, care for families, and keep this nation functioning. And that reality must never be forgotten. So as Ukraine's extraordinary defense innovators build companies, attract investment, and prepare for public offerings, all of which I look forward to seeing, I would offer this thought, not just as a suggestion, but perhaps as a moral imperative. Those who stood in the trenches should share in the rewards their sacrifice made possible, not just in words, not just in ceremonies, but in tangible ways. If these extraordinary countries achieve enormous valuations because Ukrainian soldiers held the line, those soldiers, members of the most elite fraternity of all, the brotherhood of the close fight, should share in that success. with equity, proceeds, opportunity, and long-term security for the soldiers who bore the heaviest burden and for the families of the fallen. This is not charity. It would be justice, very hard-earned justice, and I am confident that ways to ensure this can be developed and implemented by those who have demonstrated such technical genius, managerial expertise, and extraordinary management and leadership. As I draw my remarks to a conclusion, I want to place this generation of Ukrainians in historical context. I believe we are witnessing Ukraine's unbreakable generation, a generation that has fought with courage and creativity, a generation that has endured loss, deprivation, and sacrifice on a scale few societies experience. A generation that, when the guns finally fall silent, will do what unbreakable people have always done: they will build. Just as America's greatest generation achieved victory in World War II and then came home and built the highways, universities, and institutions that made the United States the strongest nation on earth, I am confident that Ukraine's unbreakable generation will build a Ukraine that is stronger, more innovative, and more resilient than ever before. The discipline, ingenuity, and resilience forged in this war will fuel extraordinary achievements in peace. Ukraine will be the new arsenal of democracy and a tremendous asset to its European, North American, and now Gulf state partners. But that future must rest on a foundation of honor and fairness, remembering those who fought, who bled, and who made victory possible, and doing so in tangible ways that will share the financial rewards earned by Ukraine's entrepreneurs with the men and women on the ground who served in the toughest of places and sacrificed so much for this great country. I was privileged to serve with extraordinary soldiers, diplomats, intelligence professionals, leaders, engineers, and other public servants over nearly 40 years of military and government service. And I say this without hesitation. Ukraine's soldiers, its other security forces, its diplomats, its spies, its engineers, its workers, its people, and its leaders rank with the very best of those with whom I ever served. All together, they are redefining the future of war and of military-industrial production in Ukraine's fight for its very existence and independence. But always, always beyond the extraordinary innovation and the unmanned systems and the exceptional software lies the brutal, enduring reality of the infantrymen on the front line, fighting in the harshest conditions imaginable for the sacred territory of Ukraine. That reality deserves our respect, our gratitude, and our unwavering, tangible support. To all who serve on the front lines, in command posts and laboratories, in workshops and schools, in businesses and in homes, to all the members of Ukraine's unbreakable generation, I offer my deepest respect and abiding admiration. Slava Ukraine.
Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Mr. Yatsenyuk, thank you for hosting this. Romina and the wonderful team at Kyiv Security Forum. I have a phenomenal set of panelists here. All have decades of intelligence and government experience in the United States. All four of us have been coming to Ukraine for many, many years before the conflict, and we'll continue to come to Ukraine once the conflict is over and successfully resolved for Ukraine. I would like to start by asking the panelists to share a little bit about maybe their first ever trip to Ukraine, to show we've all been here quite a long time, and then also to share some thoughts and observations from the last few days that we have spent visiting the front lines. We've been to Izium, to Dnipro, to Kharkiv. We drove up to Sumy and then came back to Kyiv. So please share a little bit about your first time to Ukraine and what you've seen over the last few days.
Well, why don't I start, since I'm the soldier, and I'll walk point for my two former great senior intelligence service officers who had such distinguished careers, often in and around this particular region. The first time I came to Ukraine, it was still part of the Soviet Union. We didn't realize it was in the final year. In fact, our plane, I was with the Chief of Staff of the United States Army. I was his aide. We were making the first trip by a Chief of Staff of the Army to the Soviet Union since George C. Marshall, General George C. Marshall, went to Yalta in 1944, and this was in 1990. At the foot of the plane steps was General Gromov, the last man out of Afghanistan, as you may remember, Marshal Gromov. And we realized later how historic this particular event was, because not only was it the first visit by a Chief of Staff since 1944, it was also the last visit by a Chief of Staff of the Army, thankfully, to the USSR, which fell apart in the subsequent year. And then to offer what we saw this time, and we should add Zaporizhia, we were there as well. We were in a Corps headquarters and got a phenomenal, we were in there for 4 hours with the Corps commander and in Izium, and came away from that recognizing the extraordinary, again, skill of Ukrainian soldiers everywhere, from the front lines, literally with these very elaborate positions that are now occupied by them, often hundreds of meters apart, with the Russians not that far from them. And then all of the successive layers of enablers, and then the drones of all different types, all of this integrated in a very impressive manner. And the big takeaway for me is that Ukraine, and then subsequent stops, is that Ukraine is really holding the line right now. The front line is very static. There's very incremental gains, if any at all, by the Russians. In fact, in the last 2 months, Ukrainians have gained more in net than have the Russians. And to understand how all this has been brought together was very impressive. And then in subsequent stops, we also saw the manufacturing genius of one of the leading, I think, the biggest drone manufacturers in all of Ukraine. It will make 3 million drones itself this year out of the 7 million that Ukraine likely will produce, which is unmatched anywhere in the world. The United States will work hard to produce about 400,000 drones. And then we saw an actual operation where one of the Ukrainian observation drones, surveillance drones, identified a Russian soldier and then kept pursuing him and kept handing off to another drone because the battery would go down. And we watched that pursuit as a desperate invader tried to evade and was not successful in doing so. And to see how that process came together with all of the different FPV units, all of the different surveillance outfits, and this was with one of your more sensitive elements, again, just filled an old soldier with tremendous admiration for what this nation has built, and the fact that you are now stopping the Russians cold on the front lines, which is an enormous achievement. And as you described in your forceful words up front, Prime Minister. So in a lot of ways, we'll go back, I think, with a renewed confidence, even though we acknowledge that the attention is now much more on the Gulf, in the Middle East, in Iran, and all that's going on there. It's shifting some of the priority and so forth. But the bottom line is that what Ukraine has done is of extraordinary achievement, and it absolutely deserves the continued support, focus, and indeed respect of the entire rest of the world that supports the values and the principles for which Ukraine is fighting. Chief.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to be here. The first time I was in Ukraine was in, also like General Petraeus, 1990, when I was a student at the U.S. Army Russian Institute in Germany. And we came to, we did a visit to Leningrad, Moscow, and Kyiv. And I remember as soon as we got to Kyiv, I said, this city is much cleaner and the people are much nicer than in those other two locations. And I've been back to Ukraine many times since then. I've worked in those other locations after that in my career in the intelligence business. And I would just say two things. One, as General Petraeus said, you're holding the line not only for Ukraine, but in my opinion, for the United States and for the free world. So I grew up in a world where what the Ukrainian people are doing today was very valued in our country, something that I was raised to believe in, the values that you are fighting for, the values that we should believe in. And I am honored to, every time I come here, I've been here also, I think, 11 times now since I retired from the CIA in 2023. And every time is inspiring. The people here are inspiring, the cause is inspiring, and I just want to thank you for what you're doing. And then the last thing I want to say is, if you look at what's happening in the Gulf, I've been arguing this for 2 or 3 years now. We need Ukraine as a partner. And of course, when we faced a crisis in the Gulf with Iranian shaheeds, who do we turn to? But we turn to our Ukrainian friends. And our partners in the Gulf turn to our Ukrainian friends. And that tells me that I'm not always right. In fact, my wife tells me I'm often wrong. But in this case, I think I was very right. We need Ukraine on our side. We are doing everything we can to remind Americans why that's important and how important it is for our children, just as it is for your children.
Thank you, Glenn. I know it's not a competition, but I got you guys beat. I came here first in 1985. During the Soviet Union times, I was a student, majoring in Russian and German studies. Stayed in the Hotel Dnipro, which was very comfortable. It was the Intourist hotel there, where for a couple packs of cigarettes, I was able to bribe my way into a suite and get a case of champagne for me and my fellow students. So I had very warm memories of Ukraine at that time. It was January, it was very cold, but yet this city was 10 times warmer than Moscow and 10 times warmer than St. Petersburg or Leningrad at the time. So even in the Soviet Union, one could tell that Ukraine was different. I came back here a number of times during my CIA career where I was working with, not against, our Ukrainian intelligence partners. It was a very frustrating time for me because those of us that would come here on a regular basis could see that after 2014, a future war with NATO was brewing down in the Donbass. And some of us were trying to warn our government back in Washington that this was not just some small internal conflict that could be left alone, but was something that actually was a dire warning for the West. Unfortunately, our government at the time was preoccupied with other matters, and as we found out, much to our dismay, maybe World War III didn't break out, but a conflict that was literally unimaginable back then did break out, and we're paying for that now. And I think that's one of the reasons why, like Glenn, I've come here many times over the last years, a little bit of guilt, perhaps, that we let Ukraine down at a critical time when maybe this could have been prevented. So since that time, and in our trips here, I come here with Glenn, I think the resiliency we see amongst the people, the steadfastness and the determination of the fighters and the commanders, right? We see that. We go back to the States, and Glenn and I both make a great effort to try and translate our visions and what we've seen back to the people of the United States, where, frankly, support for Ukraine is high, but not enough. right? Most Americans do support the effort here in Ukraine, and I think they are starting to understand, particularly with the incidents in the Gulf now, that you're right, Mr. Yatsenyuk. This is not just a war between two states. This is a war of a clash of cultures, a clash of ideals. Right? And the United States, very clearly, our ideals are much closer to Ukrainian ideals and values than they are with Russia. And when we look at the Russian alliance with Iran, with North Korea, with China, becomes even clearer which side of the fight the United States needs to stay on. So for those reasons, we come to Ukraine, and we'll continue to do so.
General, I'll start the first question with you, but then Glenn and Ralph, I'd love to get your take on it as well. General, you've mentioned that there are, in this point in time, two versions of Washington. A version that sees Ukraine as a recipient of aid and a charity case, and one that sees Ukraine as an innovation hub that our industrial base and our military urgently needs to learn from and absorb the lessons of. Which version do you feel is closer to reality right now?
Well, I think it has to be the latter version. But first, if I could, I wanted to add one other observation, particularly from this trip, because on one day alone, for example, we did 2 7-hour travels in cars to get from where we needed to be to the next location and so forth. And I should note that my brilliant intelligence colleagues with whom I was privileged to serve when I was the director of the CIA said there's one thing that you're not going to believe along the way, and that is the quality of the gas stations and the mini marts at the gas stations. And I said, okay, well, I mean, we have 7-Elevens at gas stations. How can you beat a 7-Eleven? And it is unbelievable. You should franchise these and bring them to the United States with the hot dogs that are constantly, yep, and with the little things that you put the hot dog in, like it's not just a normal American bun. This thing is toasted. It's an artwork. And again, they were exactly right. Their intelligence assessment of that was precisely correct. But yes, there are different views of Ukraine from Washington. And it's really important that the audience understand that there are multiple Washingtons and multiple communities in the United States. Again, I'd reiterate what the chiefs said, which is that there is very broad, very strong support for Ukraine throughout the American public. That has been steady. It's not going down. Certainly in Washington, there are parts of Washington, I'd point out in particular, the Senate, very, very strongly supportive of Ukraine. 90 of 100 senators support a very strong sanctions package. The House is very supportive as well. There are other parts of the executive branch, for example, that do see Ukraine as more of a recipient of a needy recipient of aid than of the extraordinary military, industrial bastion of freedom that we see. But I very much think that it is what you described as the latter, which is this incredible, innovative, adaptive, resilient country, not just, again, military or manufacturers or engineers or others. It's the entire country. And even when we were down in locations which had clearly been occupied by the Russians before, in the very early days, and then from which they were liberated, you see the immense pride of the Ukrainian people. The building might be destroyed, but by God, the street outside is clean. I was marveling when we were going through part of ZAP that there is a huge effort planting flowers along the median between the street. This is a country at war, and yet it is just determined that the invader is not going to present them from having a very nice setting in which they may be on the lookout, but by God. And so, again, this is this unbounded admiration which we have sought to convey in Washington, even to those who sometimes say we should be looking for ourselves first and so forth, reducing aid. And thankfully, Congress still put money in the budget for Ukraine. And Congress has legislation that says the United States cannot withdraw from NATO and a variety of other actions like that that reflect that very powerful, very important segments of our government are hugely supportive of Ukraine.
Regarding the United States, I would say that beyond Washington, I mean, we all have to remember that our politicians answer to their constituents. And I've had the fortune since I retired to travel around the United States to speak on the issue of the war here, to try and educate Americans about the truth. Because as you all know, one of the aspects or one of the fields of battle that we're dealing with is the information space, where the Kremlin has a very well-developed active measures capability that goes back even to Tsarist times. They have been using that very effectively to try and influence the U.S. public, the European public opinion. And unfortunately, I think Ukraine has not had the same amount of resources available to it to do what the Russians have been doing. So we've been trying to do our part and talk to Americans around the country. And what I see with Americans is when you can get to them and talk to them, they have questions about why are we providing assistance. You know the disinformation. Last week, there was another round of disinformation going around that the Ukrainians were taking money that was given to Ukraine and using it for U.S. domestic political purposes. That's an old lie that is being recycled from 2021, 22. And it's very important for us to go speak to people and explain to them that is not what's happening. You know the lie that the Ukrainians were persecuting the church here and persecuting priests and Svященников. We know that that's not true, and we have to explain to Americans that that's not true. What I've seen is when we do that and we deliver that message and we have a dialogue with Americans, they are very supportive of what you're doing because, again, as Ralph said, the values of Ukraine are the values of most Americans. So we just have to keep up in this information space, keep waging this war against an enemy which is very resilient and very crafty, and we have to give the Russians credit. But the last thing I do want to say is we talk about innovation, technical innovation here. We talk about the resilience of the Ukrainian people. I do want to take my hat off, if I was wearing one, to our colleagues in the Ukrainian intelligence services. Because I think since 2022, they've done an amazing job. And as an intelligence professional who worked against the same problem set that they're dealing with today, I don't think that I or my colleagues could have ever matched what I'm seeing from the SBU, from HUR, or from FISU. So God bless them for what they're doing, and God continue to give them strength and courage to keep up the fight. And we will keep up the fight in the information space any way that we can.
That's well said, Glenn. And on the information warfare, look, it's not a fair fight, and it's never going to be a fair fight, right, between Ukraine and Russia, or the West and Russia. And that's as true on the battlefield as it is in the information space. But that doesn't mean that we can't fight it. Doesn't mean we can't wage that war. And I would encourage Ukraine to double down on the effort in the information space. One of the things I point out to Americans when I'm back home talking about the values, I always tell them, I said, you know what? Go onto YouTube and watch a video of a prisoner exchange. Right? I said, if you want to understand who the Ukrainians are fighting, who the Ukrainians are, and who the Russians are, watch a video of a prisoner exchange where you see scores of Ukrainian soldiers coming home. They're emaciated. They've clearly been maltreated. Right? They're wrapped in the Ukrainian flag, but they're smiling. They're happy. They're kissing the ground. They're hugging their friends. They're celebrating. Then the camera shifts to the Russians. Right? They're healthy looking. They're well fed. They've clearly been treated properly within the laws of governing holding prisoners of war. They're sitting in their vans waiting to go home. None of them are smiling. None of them are happy. They're sitting there, they're sad, they're depressed. They have no idea what's going to happen to them. Are they going home to prison? Or worse, are they going back to the front? Right? And I tell Americans, watch that, and I think you'll understand everything you need to know about values. So again, I would encourage Ukraine, double down on the fight for the information space. Make Americans understand who you are and what you're about. Right? It's not a lost cause.
And to touch on what these amazing gentlemen said, the title of our panel is What Washington Sees When It Looks at Ukraine, and it is a bit of a split camp right now, but the better distinction should be how the United States feels when it looks at Ukraine. And right now, the polls for Ukrainian support is well over, I think, the high 70%. even for things like sending more weapons and tomahawks and continuing to send aid. The United States is with Ukraine, even if sometimes our politics don't reflect that. General Petraeus, the last few weeks, I know you've been very busy back and forth to the Middle East, showing support, immense expertise in this area. I've heard you say in comments and conversations with government leaders around the world and to the media that when the United States was hit by Shaheds at our bases, and so were other Gulf states, who was the call that they made? Who did they turn to for support in defending themselves? Do you feel that Washington is feeling and registering this shift in where allies and partners are looking to for support? Or do you feel it's something that has not fully registered yet?
Well, I have felt for a very long time that all countries in the Western world have not been learning sufficiently from Ukraine's experiences, innovation, and now expertise. And it's true. I mean, when Poland, remember when the Russians had an incursion in Polish airspace, who did Poland call? They didn't call Brussels or Washington, actually, or even Silicon Valley. They called Kyiv. Who did the Gulf states call? They called Kyiv. I thought it was brilliant for President Zelensky to personally go to the Gulf states and to bring Ukrainian experts and actual Ukrainian drone interceptors. The truth is that Ukraine can build even more drones than it actually needs here in Ukraine if it has to, but I hope that it will be doing this overseas. I'm looking forward. We're trying to support, in fact, Brave One, the government organization that supports your innovation in the military-industrial space, was just in the United States for about 3 weeks. It brought a number of the leading drone companies with it, and it was basically advertising for what Ukraine has done. And I'm very hopeful that the government will allow these companies to manufacture in other locations. This, not only will it not detract from what is being done here, it's actually going to make money which can be brought back here to increase the production here. Again, they can continue to scale this production. We were at the manufacturing site yesterday, which we visited, and it's one of many that I've visited over the years. They have 11 other sites just like that one. It is, again, breathtaking. It is cutting edge manufacturing as well. They're printing their own circuit boards. There's 3-dimensional printing, additive manufacturing, robotics, and all the rest of that. So again, though, I have felt that we have not learned enough about the future of warfare represented here right now, much less about what you're going to talk about with Isaac Flanagan, an American engineer, software expert, entrepreneur, successful businessman who did so well that he basically was out in Aspen, Colorado skiing when Russia invaded Ukraine and immediately came here, and he's been here ever since, trying to help Ukraine develop, in particular, in this case, in the software platform that is so impressive, your Delta system, iStars, and the others. So again, I hope that we will see the advent of Ukrainian companies, as I said in my remarks, not just being domestically successful, but being international successes and the standard. By the way, the United States doesn't want our police forces and others to buy Chinese drones anymore for obvious reasons. We can't make enough drones in the US to satisfy that demand, and they cost too much anyway, and they're not as good. So where should they get them from? They should get them from here. And again, I'm hopeful that we'll see, I won't add the names, but whatever company producing in the United Arab Emirates, which would love to have them, in the United States in various locations, in Asia, helping the challenges out there to ensure that deterrence in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait is rock solid as well.
Glenn and Ralph, this next question will be to both of you from the intelligence community perspective. Do you feel that the intelligence community is understanding the speed at which Ukraine is innovating? And do you feel that from a collection posture towards Ukraine, it is more oriented towards what Ukraine needs or what we need to be learning from what Ukraine has built?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I would say yes. Our on the intelligence side, our collectors, our people who are out there, right, with our Ukrainian colleagues, they do understand the speed. They're there side by side with our Ukrainian colleagues. Where the message gets a little bit disrupted, unfortunately, is by the time it gets back to the home front, back to the United States, back to Washington, right, where bureaucracy takes over. That's the bad news. The good news is there is recognition of this, even in the senior ranks in the intelligence community, that things are changing so quickly out here, and we're not adapting fast enough to take advantage of that. So there are efforts there to change, for instance, procurement systems. There's efforts to change the processes for bringing in new technology. There's efforts there to change the processes and shorten the times to get stuff out to the field. So I feel rather confident that on the intelligence side, we get it, but unfortunately, the problem with the intelligence side is we're much smaller, right? Where the big money is with the Department of War, right, in the large industry side. So the intelligence community is a small part of that. We can be like the canary in the coal mine and give the message of warning to the rest of the government, hey, things are moving fast here, we're not keeping up, and turn it over to them. But we can't really implement the changes that we need.
Yeah, I would say that sometimes there's a misconception that the CIA or the U.S. intelligence community knows all and has the resources to follow everything. And I do have to say, and this may not be popular with this audience, and I would understand why, but you have to remember that on any given day, the director of the CIA is dealing with a crisis somewhere new in the world. The United States in general is trying to manage many crises all the time, and resources have to be split, sent from one part of the world to another to focus on a crisis. I know we're all looking at what's happening in Iran today. I have to share my opinion on this. I think the United States is doing the right thing after many, many years of letting the Iranians attack us and our allies. And I do ask that the Ukrainian people remember that just as Russia is trying to destroy and wipe Ukraine off the face of the map, which we should never allow to happen, the Iranians openly declared their intent to destroy the state of Israel and to wipe it off the map. And so we've got to, and as an American, I believe we have to support our Israeli allies and our Ukrainian allies. Sometimes that means resources are not what we would always want in the intelligence business. But I should say this too. Honestly, I don't think that the answer is in the U.S. intelligence community. I think the answer is in great Americans like Isaac. I think it's in the business community where innovation can really move. Because I hate to admit it, but as a former bureaucrat, 34 years, bureaucracy is not made to move at the speed at which I see happening here. And the United States isn't in an existential fight, right? Actually, it really is, in my opinion, but people don't realize it. The Ukrainians did what they did because they realize you're in an existential war for survival. And until Americans realize that, the bureaucracy is not going to move at the speed that your bureaucracy may be moving in today. So that means we have to rely on the private sector, which can be very innovative, which can move very quickly. And again, we have an example of an American who came from the private sector and is doing great things, probably more impactful than anything that I could have done as a senior official in the CIA, in my personal assessment. So thank God we have people like that.
General Petraeus, you've written a piece recently with Isaac Flanagan about the coming rise of autonomous military formations, not just the individual systems, but entire autonomous military units. If Ukraine has the most advanced operational laboratory for the concept in the world, why is it that you think the lessons getting back to Western forces are moving so slowly?
Well, some of it is what is in truth a misplaced belief that because we are the greatest economy in the world, therefore we clearly have to have the greatest technology in the world. That's not true, actually. And again, because of the necessity, the fight for survival here, Ukraine, which by the way sent lots of brilliant innovators to Silicon Valley. If you look at the number, and now a lot of them have come back or from Europe, and we just haven't recognized the urgency of making the overall changes in the U.S. military writ large, much less getting on the cutting edge of what you're talking about and what you'll discuss, I'm sure, with Isaac, the coming age of autonomous warfare. And here, what I'm talking about is that you have to actually change your entire concept of warfare. You have to throw the old one out. Innovation to cope with today's war is not giving an armored battalion 50 drones or even 100 drones. It's replacing the armored battalion with a drone battalion. This is exactly what Ukraine has done. It created an unmanned systems force. So you have an Army, Navy, Air Force, and unmanned systems force. We haven't remotely done that, even within our individual services, much less a new separate force. You have to change how you train and operate. You have to change how you educate your leaders. You have to change what you buy and how you buy it. By the way, as is mentioned, we need to overhaul our procurement system. We don't want 1 million drones of exactly this type anymore. We want 10,000, and then the next batch with a software change, and then the next batch with a hardware change. So the whole system has to be changed. And that's before we get to true autonomy, which no one has yet. Ukraine is experimenting with artificial intelligence and algorithms driving some of the systems in their final actions once they lock onto a target or when the command and control link is broken. So it's beginning this process, but Isaac and I think this is coming much sooner than people realize, and we're on the back foot in the United States with respect to recognizing this rather than on the front foot where Ukraine is. And then in the future, it's not just going to be autonomous drones, so no human driving it or remotely piloting it. It's going to be swarms of autonomous drones, and then it's going to be autonomous systems of systems, where the sensors are taking decisions in accordance with the leader's vision and concept and instructions, which are captured in an algorithm, and they are actually giving orders or direction to the autonomous systems that will then follow the orders of the autonomous, and it's all going to be, again, a system of systems. And that's actually very scary, because if you're not prepared for it, you're going to be overwhelmed by it. And again, I would contend that Ukraine is the closest of any military in the world to achieving that. But we haven't even caught up with where Ukraine is. Keep in mind what killed our 13 soldiers in the Middle East, we believe, is drones. It's Shahed drones that Iran has made. Of course, it was Shahed drones that Iran gave to Russia that Russia then began to mass produce and also to improve. And we've got to move much more rapidly to identify the lessons we should be learning from Ukraine and then applying them. A lesson is not learned when it's brought back. It's learned when it's actually incorporated into concepts and the other actions that actually constitute true institutional change, which Ukraine has done.
Gentlemen, as we wrap up on our panel, are there any final closing remarks you would like to add, or any message you want to convey to all of our Ukrainian friends?
Yeah, my message would be, don't give up on America. You may not like the news coming out of there, but remember there's more than one America, as my colleagues have pointed out. Right? And America has a very good habit of eventually doing the right thing. Right? You look at our history, we're slow to anger, but when we get there, right, we're the worst enemy you can have and the best friends you can have. So don't give up on America. Keep working. And be a bridge to our European allies as well. Right? These are times where a lot of mixed messages coming out across the Atlantic from both sides, and it's a critical time for us to understand that all alliances, all countries go through political upheavals, but that's not forever. Right? What is more enduring are our values, right? And understanding the world that's coming at us, right? This bipolar world of totalitarian states versus democratic states, while a number of states, right, the non-aligned states, they're sitting back and watching, right? We're fighting not just for the hearts and minds of our own people, but we're fighting for the hearts and minds of people who have yet to commit to one side or the other. So don't give up on America. Keep trying.
I would just add to that that there are many Americans, as Ralph said, that recognize how important your victory is for the United States and for all the things that we believe in, including freedom of speech, including freedom of worship, including the right to do things without being dictated to by a government. And anyone that knows Russia knows that the Kremlin will never allow its people to live like that. And so I used to tell the Russians all the time, if you want to live like that, that's your business, but you do not have the right to tell your neighbors how to live. And we should never allow the Russians to have that right. And I do think there are very many Americans that agree with that. And again, I want to stress that we have, I mean, in this room right now, Clara is a great example, another one of an American who is brilliant, very successful, and she's here doing what she's doing because she cares about Ukraine, she cares about the United States, and she cares about the future of the world that we all want to live in and we want our children to live in. And it's not a world where Putin or the supreme leader of the Iranian Republic gets to dictate to people how they live. It's how we can dictate to governments how we should live. So, Slava Ukraini.
Let me first echo what Ralph said and remind you all, it was actually Churchill, of course, who said you can always count on the Americans to do the right thing after they do all the other things. And then I would also say that I very much look forward to Ukraine, to its leaders, its government, enabling and promoting its defense industrial champions as they seek to build plants elsewhere, to show the genius of Ukraine's defense industries, and frankly, to make money and bring it back to expand the already very impressive production that is ongoing here, and that really is the finest in the world in many critical areas when it comes to military innovation.
Gentlemen, thank you so much, and let's please give a big welcome to these friends of Ukraine. So I would like to welcome another wonderful friend of Ukraine, an American entrepreneur who I am very proud to now call a friend as well. Isaac was in the United States, building companies, selling companies. As the general said, essentially retired in Aspen, skiing all day. And then one day he saw the news in 2022. He followed the story, he saw those first few weeks of resistance, and he felt compelled to do something about it and to stand with Ukraine and the incredible bravery that he was seeing. So Isaac came out of retirement, he went to Ukraine, and he started looking for things that he could support in a nonprofit capacity and help foster and build using all the talents that he had as a very successful entrepreneur in the United States. Isaac has been here since 2022 now, right? Barely leaves. I am maybe in the States once or twice a year. He is here. He is fighting on the front lines with you guys, learning, and trying to get these messages across to Western partners continuously. Isaac, you were supposed to be on our recent trip with us. You sadly weren't able to make it, but you frequently travel along all these different areas in the front. Can you start our panel by briefly sharing some of your observations over the last few years, building and growing, and what we've seen recently?
Thanks, Kara, and thanks to the entire Open Ukraine team for having us here. I think if there was one thing I would want Western media to have a clearer grip on when it comes to the front line and the dynamics out there is just how fast the rate of change is. In the early days, my colleagues, co-founders, and I, we would go forward for extended trips. We'd be out there sometimes a month or more at a time. More recently, the last couple of years, it's basically 4 times a year. We go out every 90 days. We talk to the soldiers we know, old friends, new friends, and that cadence, that interval, actually gives you a really good data set of how quickly things are changing. And the pattern, which is no less remarkable for having gotten used to it, but frankly, we have gotten used to it, is you'll visit in September, make an assessment, ask the standard questions. What are your biggest gaps right now? What have you built in the last 90 days? What are you working on for the next 90 days? And you will hear professional soldiers give you a laundry list of problems that when you hear them, you're kind of like, oh, that's a lot. That's going to be a heavy lift. And then you come back 90 days later, and you get into the questions that you're talking about, and eventually you kind of circle back to, hey, what about those things we asked about 3 months ago? And the answer is, oh, all fixed. Moved on to the next thing. And I think that cadence of innovation, as much as people like to write stories about the culture of innovation here, the speed is really, really hard to put into words. And then the second thing I would say, just from our most recent trip in January, was I was struck by how high the morale was and how that diverged from what was being written about in at least English language media about the state of the fight, and looking at what the troops have accomplished, the liberation of Kupiansk, a number of other very successful operations. It's clear to me that that morale in January was a leading indicator of what was to come, and I believe better things are to come over the next 90 days as well.
So Isaac and I designed this panel around a question we spend a lot of time talking about. And we talk all the time. We're trying to brainstorm what can we do? What does a productive relationship between Western allies and Ukraine actually look like? Not in theory, but in practice. Isaac, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. How do you view it? You're in the thick of things constantly. You're also working with American partners that come here and trying to push them to learn some of these lessons faster. What do you see the partnership looking like?
So I want to quickly take it back to what our host said at the very beginning. There is a prime directive. We have to prevail. We have to win. And I think that we is much more than just Ukraine. Yes, Ukraine needs to win this fight, but as he also said, and this is what motivated myself and my co-founders to come here 4 years ago, this is not a war between two states. This is a war between two systems. There's a right side and a wrong side. Those of us who believe in democracy and liberty, we have to win. And we have to be ready, hopefully, to deter the fights to come. And if we can't deter them, we have to win them. So what does this mean for learning? It means that we in the West, we can't just support Ukraine to a victory. We have to be prepared ourselves for the things that are to come. So I look at effective partnership, the phases of the partnership, as really having 3 phases. There's donate, learn, and build. And this is kind of from the perspective of allies. So this full-scale invasion started with Western nations as donors. That phase was necessary. It was generous. It saved lives. Helped keep Ukraine in the fight in a very important time. It also wasn't always well matched to what Ukraine actually needed. Donations arrived on the donor's timeline, in the donor's format, based on the donor's assessment of the problem. It's not a criticism. That's how emergency response, crisis response works pretty much everywhere. But it is fundamentally one-directional. The phase we should be in now, and I emphasize should be, is the West actually learning from Ukraine. And as the general said earlier, learning is not just going into the field, taking some notes, writing a report, bringing it back with you. There's a lot more to that. Ukraine has generated more battlefield innovation in the last 4 years than most Western defense establishments have produced in 20. The list goes on. Drone warfare, counter-UAS, battle space management systems, tactics, techniques, procedures. In the organizational question, and I personally think this is the fundamental question, not just for Ukraine, but for us, the organizational question of how do you fight with imperfect systems networked together? The lessons are there, they're available, but I question whether this learning phase has actually started in earnest. Yes, there are programs. Yes, there are delegations. Yes, there are reports. There are conference panels like this one. Vital as all of that is. But learning that doesn't change institutional behavior isn't learning. Arguably, it's a form of tourism. By that standard, I don't really think we're much past the beginning of phase 2, let alone the middle of it. The third phase, most important phase, building durable security and prosperity architecture together as genuine partners, that's where we need to get. But we can't build together, we can't be in the build phase until the learning is real. This is a sequence. Right now, we're in danger of merely talking about phase 3 while we're still muddling our way through phase 2. Now, here's where the opportunity comes in. Prior panel was talking about some of the instability in the current environment. Political uncertainty, changing threat landscapes, emerging theaters, all of the things that can and do make people in this space anxious. That instability might actually be the condition that produces better partnerships, not in spite of the disorder that we face, but because of it. Partnerships built under pressure, where both sides need each other and know it, tend to be more honest and more durable than the ones designed in comfortable times. So I don't despair about this disorder. I'm saying we need to use it better than we are. I've lived in Kyiv almost 4 years. Did visit here for the first time 10 years ago, but I've lived here almost 4 years. I've driven nearly 15,000 miles around frontline regions and spent thousands of hours talking to Ukrainian warfighters. Being here indefinitely has helped provide important continuity and also shows the seams and the blind spots that arise from short rotations and short-term perspectives.
So if the learning is there and the lessons are available, why do you feel that we have not yet converted these lessons into changed behavior? What do you feel is blocking it when it comes to us in Ukraine here and some of the Western allies that need to learn this behavior?
Well, at the risk of stating the obvious, change is really hard for a lot of different reasons. It's slow, it's expensive. People who have risen to the level of power and influence in organizations and institutions that can champion change are also typically quite invested in the status quo that got them to that place. So the folks who can rise to the very top and then not only advocate for, not only observe the need for, but execute and champion radical change, as General Petraeus and as his colleagues have done, these people are incredibly rare. So that's the beginning, I think, some of the just fundamental nature of institutions. Now, the good thing is when you start to get them moving, you can get them moving to very good places. Now, when it comes to Ukraine, Ukraine is playing in the Super Bowl every single day. Its allies scrimmage a few times a year. A design flaw identified by a frontline operator here reaches the engineering team the same afternoon. There is no peacetime exercise that can replicate that feedback loop. So this is another challenge, right? Even when you get senior leaders who have the power in their institutions and actually want to upend the status quo, then you ask, well, how do you give them the tools to do their job? How do you give them the evidence they need to do their job? Because again, if you want to radically restructure the offensive strategy of an NFL team, it helps to be playing games, not to be scrimmaging. So different blockers on each side beyond that. the Western side, briefly, every piece of evidence that what Ukraine is doing works, every piece of evidence that what Ukraine is doing should be the template for the future, every piece of evidence like that is a challenge to the existing model. It's a threat to the existing model. And we do hear, I think, even well-intentioned partners of Ukraine who will say, I think, statements that make sense at the time, which is, well, look, it's really interesting, it's really compelling what the Ukrainians have done. They should be so proud of themselves. But this is open warfare on the Eurasian steppe, and other theaters that we will fight in aren't going to be like that. There is a tendency to sort of make this very specific to just one conflict, just one moment in time, which, of course, leads out the fact that Ukraine has probably done more naval warfare innovation than any other power has in decades. So, look, if Ukraine can produce an interceptor drone for under $2,000, that raises uncomfortable questions for every program of record in every Western defense ministry. The incentive structure then, as I used in the prior example, the incentive structure does, even for well-meaning people, it does kind of favor dismissal. It favors coming up with a reason to say, well, that is really cool, but it also doesn't count for us over here. And so I think one of the challenges we as partners, when thinking about our own security, have to force ourselves to be far more open-minded than we have been. At Exercise Hedgehog last year, many of you may be familiar with this exercise in Estonia, Ukrainian units acting as the Red Force destroyed the equivalent of 2 NATO battalions in a single day before NATO could even line its own troops up, get its own drones out. Quoting the after-action report, the Blue Force troops were lined up like cars in a shopping mall parking lot. So that's not a theoretical gap, that's a measured gap, and it does apply to us, and I would argue that the speed gap is growing, not shrinking.
Do you feel that it's, reasonable for us? We come to Ukraine frequently. We understand the deeply existential nature here, and that, it is pushing some of the innovation cycle forward and faster. Do you feel it's reasonable for us to have that same expectation of, allies around the world who should be learning from this but aren't? Do you feel that at this point the existential nature and the timeline is justified to push elsewhere?
Yes, absolutely, and I think recent events have shown that. Look, I'll qualify by saying it's very easy for someone in my position to sit here and talk about what other people who have very important responsibilities, what those people do for a living. It's easy to sit on the sidelines and say, well, here's what you should do better. Here's what you should do faster. And as prior panelists were saying, folks in these positions are facing a different crisis every single day of the week. So I'm not saying any of this is easy, but when we talk about just one of these narrow domains, counter-UAS, Ukrainian politicians, military officials, entrepreneurs have been saying for basically since October of 2022, since the Shaheeds first started showing up in Ukrainian cities, back when we didn't have Patriot here, back when this air defense architecture didn't exist, for almost 3.5 years now, Ukrainians have been saying to the West, this is only our problem for now. This will be your problem soon enough. And then we have a series of wake-up calls. We had the incursions in Poland last summer. We have now what's happening in the Middle East. So yes, I would certainly argue that the time to act is yesterday, and it's very, very easy to come up with compelling and coherent reasons to move slowly, but we do that at our peril.
And earlier in your response, you said that learning that doesn't change behavior is tourism. What does real learning look like? And is there an example you could share of it actually working, either here or something you're seeing the West start to pick up from what they're seeing in Ukraine?
Absolutely. I think as important as it is to learn from Ukrainian technology in the software domain, in the hardware domain, the systems, the tactics, I think the metaphor that answers your question is actually in the policy domain. And this gets overlooked. I think the biggest and most consequential innovation that Ukraine has made has actually been in policy, and that's what's unblocked everything else. So Everyone here knows about Delta. Delta rightfully has earned the respect of the entire world as the world's most consequential piece of military software. But I think the story behind it is equally compelling and has lessons and shines a light on gaps that the West has. So Delta was built by volunteers, not by the government, not by a defense prime, not through a procurement program. A volunteer organization that many of you here are familiar with called Aerorozvidka. They built it, they stood it up, they connected it to everything that they could. They found the initial end users to serve as pilot users, and they gave frontline units a common operating picture, a shared consciousness, a shared understanding that didn't exist before. And I think this is a good metaphor, so much so that Major Brovdi of Unmanned Systems Forces put it simply, saying in The Economist last week that when the Americans come, they ask us which drone is the best. I tell them the best drone is an ecosystem. Delta not only happens to be the ecosystem that the drones are coordinated with, but it is also an example of the need for ecosystems. And it teaches us two things that are the most important lessons of this war for anyone who's trying to understand what and how Ukraine actually innovated. So first, the decision to authorize Delta in the first place, the decision to scale it, the decision to adopt it, mattered more than the technology behind it. There's a lot of different ways to build software, and I ask this hypothetical sometimes when I'm out in the field. I ask Ukrainian warfighters, what would the situation be like right now if Delta never existed? And they give the classic Ukrainian example. Well, if Delta didn't exist, then when we would build something that is just like Delta. So not going to get boxed in on a question like that. But someone made a policy choice to let non-traditional actors build a critical warfighting system, accept that it would be imperfect, not put it through years and years of lengthy accreditation processes, and then let them iterate very quickly in contact with the enemy. That's a policy innovation, not a technology innovation. And it's the one that made everything else possible. So everything downstream, from the drones, the kill chains, the sensor fusion, all of that flows from a decision to let imperfect systems into the fight and improve them under fire rather than waiting for a perfect solution. This would be heretical in most, if not all, Western systems today. The second lesson is that once you network enough imperfect systems together into a coordinated architecture, you don't actually need the exquisite ones nearly as much. Exquisite coordination then will beat exquisite platforms. Ukraine proves this every day at scale under fire. You don't need the best drone. You need 1,000 adequate drones that talk to each other and to every other sensor and shooter on the battlefield, and then you replace them with better ones every week. Delta enables that. Just a quick story, a very recent one. So last week or the week before, the 1st Assault Regiment recently ran an integrated operation in which 200 to 300 drones swarmed a 4-kilometer frontage before infantry advanced. The drones isolated positions, cut off reinforcements, collapsed defenses. Then and only then did troops move forward. By available evidence, no other military on Earth has demonstrated this capability at scale. That's not a technology demonstration, that's a new form of warfare, and it happened because the architecture behind the individual platforms made that possible. So these two insights, that policy innovation outperforms technology innovation, and coordination architecture matters more than the superiority of any individual platform, I think those are worth more than any single weapon system. And those are the two things, and this is, I think, really, really important for Westerners to understand. These two lessons are the lessons that have transferred the least. They are at the absolute bottom of all of the things that allies and partners are learning. So that learning, not saying that no learning is happening. It's not that Western delegations haven't visited. It's that the specific lessons that would actually require institutional change, different authority structures, different risk tolerance, different theories of how you integrate capability, different realities of how you permit something to be used by your force, civilian and non. These are the lessons that bounce off institutions, because absorbing them means changing how you do business. And changing how you do business is the one thing that large institutions are designed not to do.
Now, Isaac, you told me a number before this panel that I wrote down here. You said that Ukraine, and I've heard this number can be even higher at this point, I think from some of President Zelensky's recent comments, but Ukraine is producing at least 1,000 interceptors a day and intercepting at a 90% rate. There is a strain of thinking in some Western defense establishments that treats what Ukraine has built as impressive, but not serious at institutional scale. I think we all heard some of the Rheinmetall CEO's recent comments, housewives producing, Lego parts. It's working, clearly, at huge numbers, at huge scale, at incredible effectiveness. How does what Ukraine is doing square with that outside perception that this isn't maybe so serious?
Well, it simply doesn't square with that perception at all. There's one part where I almost, and I say almost because we're in year 5 now, but I can almost forgive stakeholders like that, observers like that, for their ignorance, because this isn't new. This is how paradigm shifts work. Almost every truly disruptive innovation in any domain, it starts out looking like a toy, which in fact, famously, the FPV strike drones and the Mavics were toys until Ukrainians learned how to make them weapons. So truly game-changing innovation often comes from the edge. It often comes from people that you're not used to taking lessons from. The thing about being on the edge is that you can see much more clearly out there. So that's the mild understanding that I have, that paradigm shifts are always like that. Now, the data's not ambiguous. 1,000 interceptors per day, plus 90% intercept rate, plus against nearly 1,000 incoming munitions at once, $878 per confirmed kill, per The Economist this month. 10,000 units shipped to the Middle East because forces over there needed something that worked and nothing in the existing inventories was ready at that price point. So at a certain point, the data overwhelms the narrative, and I think we're long past that point. The question now is whether and how quickly Western institutions adapt, or whether Ukraine just continues building around them, because that's what's already happening. These agreements that are in the works in the Gulf, European export centers, bilateral defense partnerships, these aren't a backup plan. They're becoming the primary architecture. They're becoming the main effort. And if the West doesn't move faster, it risks something truly paradoxical, which is not being left behind by an adversary, it's being left behind by its own ally.
And as we come to the close of our panel here, we have a few more minutes. What final thoughts or comments or observations do you have, both for those who may hear this back home in the States or our friends here in Ukraine?
Well, I think that the lesson that Delta taught everyone, again, is not just about how to coordinate forces on a battlefield. It's the fact that the bottleneck, whether you're trying to coordinate troops on the ground or you're trying to execute institutional change, the bottleneck's not the hardware. It's the decision architecture. Who's authorized to act, how fast approval moves, what level of imperfection is acceptable. So if you can fix the decision environment, the technology transfer follows. I think the temptation is to try to copy or buy or license specific systems, and that's really important. But there is no Western nation equivalent to Aerorozvidka, the volunteer organization that built Delta from a basement in Mykolaiv and turned it into the most consequential battlefield management system on Earth. No Western Innovation Center, for all of them and all of their budgets and all their very real accomplishments, none of them can point to the kind of results that Ukraine's Ministry of Digital Transformation has delivered under fire. So I would say if there's one message that I could sort of install in the minds of allies in these institutions is, yes, by all means, buy Ukrainian weapons. They work and the cost exchange ratio is fantastic. License the technology, build joint ventures, build co-production facilities, but also invest a lot of time in figuring out how can you create the organizations that delivered these effects. Because if all you do is buy, license, and co-produce the technology, then you are buying or renting the fruit while ignoring that the tree exists.
No, absolutely right. And we've seen that spending so much time in Ukraine, and I've heard General Petraeus mention this frequently, and we've discussed this in a piece we recently wrote. It is not just the systems and the technology that Ukraine has built, but it is the very real human element behind it, and the teamwork and the coordination systems, the volunteers, incredible folks like Isaac and these gentlemen who shared their time with us today that have come here and have trained. And the resilience piece and the incredible innovation and teamwork is something that we should be learning too, not just the technology and the drones. Please join me in thanking Isaac Flanagan, our incredible friend of Ukraine.
Thank you, Claire.